We're going to take another look at the covenant through Psalm 105. This is similar, but it's got points of difference. It hasn't got the laments in this psalm. And again, remind you, this psalm is in Book 4, and Book 4 looks at the hope of Israel. So, just like Psalm 89, the beginning is similar. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among his people. Sing to him, sing praises to him, tell of all his wondrous works. Glory is his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his presence continually. Remember the wondrous works that he has done, his miracles, and the judgment he uttered. Only then, O offspring of Abraham, his servant, children of Jacob, his chosen ones. So again, the psalmist is moving on to reflect on God's covenant. And just like the previous Psalm 89, the psalmist prefaces the remembrance of God, of what the glory of God, the mighty works of God. And it is only with this beginning that the psalmist move on to talk about the covenants. And so in verse 6, he prefaces it with offspring of Abraham, his chosen ones. So it is as if to say in both of these psalms that the covenant of God is totally the grace of God to his people. And in the next section of this psalm, the psalmist then move on to talk about the covenant more clearly. It's not like the in Psalm 89 where he just mentioned the covenant and close it within that mighty works of God in a very long preamble. And you can see that it's different here. Having briefly made reference to God and what God has done, he moves straight and talk about that covenant. Verse 7, he is the Lord our God, his judgment are in all the earth. He remembers his covenants forever, the word that he commanded for 1,000 generations. The covenants that he made with Abraham, his sworn promise. Promise is referring to covenant. To Isaac, which he confirmed to Jacob as a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant, saying, to you I will give the land of Canaan as your portion for an inheritance. So you can see where the psalmist is coming from here, that covenant of God is forever, for 1,000 generations. And you can see that from Abraham to 1,000 generations, he's setting the stage to say that this covenant resides with God for eternity. And so what the psalmist is doing here is that having referred to the patriarchs from Abraham to Jacob, from Abraham to Isaac, and then to Jacob, the rest of this psalm traces the history of Israel. Right? It's not simply a history. I won't read the whole of that psalm. So it is not just history, but in that history is the benevolence of God, that through that covenant relationship that God has with his people, how God led the Israelites through all the stages from the time of Jacob to Egypt, through the years of slavery in Egypt, and then out of Egypt through the wandering in the wilderness. So it goes through all that. So that section, so he continued that while they were few in numbers, then in the desert, how God nourished them, how God provided for them, having water out of the rock, for he remembered his holy promise to Abraham, his servant. So I won't read all that in the interest of time. And so we come to the end of this psalm. Which it concludes with the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham and the appropriate response from the people. 43. So he brought his people out with joy, his chosen ones with singing, and he gave them the lands of the nation, and they took possession of the fruit of the people's toil, that they might keep his statutes and observe his laws. Praise the Lord. So in this psalm, there is no lament. There's no accusation of God. It doesn't talk about blessings and judgment. It doesn't look back to their waywardness. And it's just recounting God's blessing to them, how God has taken them as a people through the wanderings, and it finishes at the entry to the promised land, gave them lands of the nations. So it simply enumerates the grace of God to Israel in all their dealings. And this psalm is in book 4, which looks forward to the fulfillment of God's promise. And we will come back to see all the psalms in the context of the book. So I haven't gone through each psalm to expound the details. My interest here is mainly to show how Israel reflect on God's promise to them as a covenant people, and more so in the previous psalm, how that struggle through their waywardness, and still out of that they can sense the fulfillment of God's covenant despite what they have gone through. There are other psalms that touch on the theme of the covenant, and they deal with other aspects of the covenant. Now, Psalm 111 elaborates on this promise to provide for his people within the covenant. And we actually have seen that as we reflect on Israel history, how through their wanderings in the wilderness, God provided for them. It's nothing that they could do. And really, I think the stories in the book of Numbers are really good, because through every episode, every encounter, God provided for them. So here, the psalmist says, he provides food for those who fear him. He remembers his covenants forever. Verse 9, he sends redemption to his people. He has commanded his covenant forever. Holy and awesome is his name. So in that relationship, God cares for his people. And see, the covenant with humanity is God's relationship with his people. And God cares for his people, and God provides for those who are his. And God is the author of the covenant. He commanded it, and it is to last forever. It is an everlasting covenant. So, what is this covenant all about? We have seen that it is God's relationship with all that he has created. I can't remember, there are two words used in the New Testament for making. One word is that you make something and then that's it, it's finished. The other word is that you make something and it's a lifelong warranty. So, the word that is used for God's covenant is that word, that God not just set up the covenant and let it run on its own. No, God is the author of the covenant, and God sees it right through. So, as we have seen in Psalm 89, that despite the waywardness and despite the punishment, there is an avenue back to God's presence. In other words, that relationship is not just terminated, because it's a covenant through all generations. It's an eternal covenant. So when God sets up the covenant, there's always a way back. It is God's provision for his people. It is because of his unfailing love that God is faithful to his covenant. He initiated the covenant. He chooses his people, Israel. The covenant is an everlasting covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and he's going to continue for all generations. His covenant is not just a concept, but it is a historical engagement with humanity where the steadfast love of God is expressed. This was firstly seen with Israel, and then through Christ, extended to all humanity. God is faithful to his covenant. It's part of his nature as the triune God. See, there are many other aspects of the covenant that we can't and won't deal with in the Psalms. I'm only restricting to talking about the covenant as it's given to us in the Psalms. There are many other aspects, and we can deal with that some other time. So the other thing I need to mention is this keeping of the covenant, which bothers a lot of people. God's love flows to his people who are called to keep the covenant. And that's a term that presents some difficulty. Psalm 25 verse 10. All the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep his covenant and his testimonies. So, in other words, the laws or the statutes. Then Psalm 103. But the steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear him. So here you see that this covenant of God is from eternity past to eternity, from everlasting to everlasting. It is beyond the time of humanity. And his righteousness to children's children, to those who keep his commandment and remember to those who keep his covenant and remember to do his commandments. You see, it is easy to understand those words, to keep his covenant on a contractual basis. As if God has made the covenant and then left us on our own to keep our part of the bargain. And that's how a lot of people understand it. But we must not understand the covenant this way. Because God, in his covenant, has promised to sustain us. And that's that next verse from Psalm 54. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life. You see, it is not because of our faithfulness that we are the recipients of God's covenantal love. His covenant precedes us, precedes all that. That even before we realize who God is and what he has done for us, God's covenant was already there. God's covenantal relationship is part of his triune nature. We won't explore that here. It is not that God has created us and then, Adam sinned and then he puts a covenant in place. Not like that. The covenant is from, where was it? Everlasting to everlasting. So the covenant precedes creation and humanity. The persons of the triune Godhead have related in a covenantal manner. They love, they give and receive from one another. That's the triune Godhead. And that covenantal relationship was in existence before creation. And the relationship within the Godhead is covenantal, and so is the relationship of the Godhead to creation is covenantal. Thus, the covenant precedes creation from everlasting to everlasting. And so, therefore, humanity cannot be an equal partner within the creation. As we will see later, the response to the covenant is provided from within the covenant. So, to keep the covenant means to remain in the covenantal relationship with the triune God and to respond to him in a way that he has provided for within the covenant. That's what it means. Keeping the covenant does not mean that we keep our part of the bargain to make covenant work. God is my helper. Yeah, that's the verse there. Now, within the covenant, there is also an intimacy in the relationship. You see, when we talk about the covenant, we're not talking about merely a concept or rules. We're talking about relating. That's the covenant. God calls his people to participate in the covenant relationship. So the friendship of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he makes known to them his covenant. So this covenantal relationship with God has to be understood on the basis of union, as the covenantal relationship within the Godhead is a triunity. God is a covenantal God, and the relationship within the Godhead is covenantal. The Godhead is a unity, and therefore our relationship with the triune God is covenantal, and so is our relationship with each other, because we are brought into the Godhead, and the Godhead relates covenantally. Now, I want to, I want to read to you in closing from the Word Biblical Commentary on this aspect of the covenant. I'll come to that in a minute. What he's saying is that this primary characteristic, which is the response of the people to the revelation from God, which formed the starting point for all theological reflection on the book of Psalms. For most part, the Psalms do not contain abstract theological statement or anything approaching philosophical theology. The theological richness of the Psalms emerges out of a profound knowledge of God, rooted in relationship, relational knowledge. Now, we come to this part here. So, undergirding the Psalms is a knowledge, a realization of their relationship with God, how God provided for them in the covenant. So, the author continues to say, thus, the psalmists are covenant writers. Whether their perspective is individual, national, or that of Israel's couch. And the knowledge of God is rooted in the covenant. So it's not outside of that relationship. It's within the relationship where you are open one to another, where what is deepest in your heart and in your mind, you say it out. You reveal yourself to the other, and that's what God has done with us. And similarly, the psalmists, in reply, in their prayers, open up to God. Even the accusations of God renegating on his covenant is recorded in the Psalms. So, the psalmists respond to God in prayer, in praise, and in particular life situations because of an already existing covenant relationship which makes such response possible. I read some sociology as well. I don't just read medicine and theology. Now, in sociology, they say, why do husband and wife fight? It's because they have a stable relationship, right? Now, you don't go and fight with a stranger and tell the stranger, what your inmost thoughts are, you see? And, the stranger can do things that you would normally do, but you don't go around as a policeman as you walk along the road. We don't, you see? That when you are confident of that stable relationship, you open up. But if you are not sure of what other people think, you present your Sunday best. You see? That's what we do. But, so, in life situations, that's how the psalmist, in the Psalms, is recorded. The lament, the accusations of God, because there is a stable covenant relationship that makes such a response possible. So in this broad sense, all the Psalms may be related to the central concept of the covenant, though they are not necessarily to be linked to a specific covenant festival. So, the central covenant, and that theology and knowledge of God emerges out of a life lived in relationship with God. And I think that passage from the author, from the commentary on the Psalms, make a very powerful statement that that's what the psalmist is doing because of that covenantal relationship. Now, I don't think we have time for discussion here. I have put up a question here that is in the Psalms too, but I don't think we have time to go through that. What is the relationship between sacrifices and the covenant? It's important because the Psalms talk about it, the New Testament talk about it as well. That gather to me my faithful ones who made a covenant with me by sacrifice. Now, what does that mean? So, having said that, the psalmist goes on in what we may think as a ridiculous fashion that God does not just accept sacrifices. So having said, made a covenant with me by sacrifice, he says, not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you. God will not accept their sacrifices. So it's quite confusing here. What comes after verse 13 is verse 14. And having said that, he goes on to say, offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving and perform your vows to the Most High and call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you and you shall glorify me. So, the sacrifices that Israel was supposed to make is that external act, which does not mean very much. That apart from that material expression, that the sacrifice of thanksgiving is what God really looked for. In other words, by following the ritual, it means nothing. That is the acceptance of God and the acknowledgement of His ways. And that's confirmed to us in the New Testament by Paul. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. So, the covenant demands of us an ordering of our life according to the ways of God. And so, there is the transformation through creating a new heart, as we see from the prophetic writings. So there we have it. 2 Psalms and a sprinkling of a few others that deals with God's relationship with His people and the way He has provided for them. And in that we see that within that covenantal relationship, there is the judgment, there's the punishment, but within it also we see that there's a way back despite all that. And that's why the 2 Psalms, one looking at the covenant from the standpoint of the exile, and one looking at the covenant as a reflection of what God has done for them. That is the hope that they have in God. So have a look at Psalm 50. Yes?
I was just noticing that one of the contrasts there seems to be that Verse 13, God says, "Do I eat the flesh of bulls?" Which is like the pagans sacrificed to their gods, thinking that they were actually feeding the gods, that the gods needed something from the people, so they make the offering, the sacrifices as a bribe to their gods to get them. Whereas a sacrifice of thanksgiving is acknowledging, well, I haven't done it, God's done it. All I can do is say thank you to God for what it's not me giving to God, it's God has given to me in that covenant relationship, and all I can do really is say thank you.
Make an additional comment on that?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm struck in that first line.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think God's being, I don't think that's right, that we are meant to make a covenant with God by sacrifice, because sacrifice is not part of the covenant.
No.
The covenant is done by God, and to make a sacrifice, to make that part of the covenant, makes the covenant like a deal, like we have to give God in return sacrifice, and that changes it from a covenant into a deal or a transaction. It's a transaction. So the relationship between covenant and sacrifice is that I would say the sacrifice is meant to be a response to the covenant, and that's underlined with that word in verse 14, offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving. So thanksgiving is not something that you're actually doing other than expressing gratitude.
Thanksgiving is from the heart.
And it's not something you give to get in return. We don't express thanks to get something back. Well, if we do, we're changing. That's not true thanksgiving. It's actually wanting to get. But thanksgiving is giving, and that's the difference.
It is. It contrasts the unseen with the seen. I remember we used to sing a chorus. God owns a cattle on 1,000 hills. So what's your one cattle doing?